Did you ever worry about him working in that building, especially after what happened years ago?
Yes, I did.
How's his wife, Shelley, holding up?
She's doing great. She's doing the best she can. We're surrounded by friends and family, and we're just all pulling together.
And are you still checking with hotlines and hospitals? Are still keeping hope going?
Larry, I've called many hotlines. I must have walked 20 miles yesterday going between St. Vincent's, Bellevue, and checking lists at every hospital, and just not losing the faith.
One can only imagine what you're going through, John.
It's
we wish
tough,
you the
Larry.
best.
Thank you very much.
And now joining us, Lena and Leona Zeppelin. Their son, Mark, is missing at the World Trade Center. Mark is 33 years old. He also worked for Cantor Fitzgerald. Leona, when did you last hear from Mark?
I actually spoke to Mark the day before the incident. I did not hear from him the morning of the tragedy. I found that out when I called my daughter-in-law just casually, and she was screaming, and she said a friend just told her that something went into the World Trade Center right near Mark's office. And I started to cry, and I turned on the TV, and I just couldn't imagine such a tragedy happening. And when I saw where it hit and I knew where his office was located, immediately I just lost it. And really didn't sleep. And then the next day we've been in the city, and we've been in the city today, checking lists, going from place to place, just doing whatever we can to find out if anyone knows of his whereabouts or who spoke to him in his last moments, and even just to meet somebody, to speak to anyone who's going through the same experience as we are in that new Mark in Cantor Fitzgerald. I know his daughter-in-law would like that, to make the connection, because we're devastated.
Lenny, where were you?
I was in my school. I'm a principal, Larry, and I received a notice from my wife that the plane had hit the building, and I was in shock. I ran home through the Rockaways with my car and picked up my wife, and we moved from there.
Is Mark your only child?
No, we have a daughter named Jocelyn, who's a speech therapist in Manhattan.
The firm he worked for, how long was he with Cantor Fitzgerald? They've really been hit the worst, I guess, as a firm.
He was there about 5.5 years.
Were you ever concerned, Lenny, at all about him being on such a high floor in such a building like that?
Quite truthfully, Larry, I never thought of it. I always was secure. He was happy. He loved his firm, and he loved his job, and we never thought that something as monstrous as this was going to happen.
All right, so what are you doing now? What do you do as the others have done? Go around the hospitals, go on internet? What do you do?
Well, that's part of the story. We went around yesterday to all the hospitals. We checked all the hospitals in New Jersey, and we went to the Chelsea Pier, and then we were just about finished at 5 o'clock when we decided to go on the internet. And when we went on the internet on NewYork.com through Microsoft MSN.com, we saw my son's name listed on the internet as a survivor. And we were shocked that he was on the internet. It said 1642, the time, fine condition. It gave us a case number, and we were related. We were not going to leave New York until but it didn't tell us what hospital or where he was. So we ran around. We finally ended up at the Pierre Hotel where Cantor Fitzgerald has a staging section to notify everyone. And they said that list was erroneous. That list was a fraud. There were no members. We don't have any of those our members on that list. We haven't heard of any from Cantor Fitzgerald that was on that list. So I was really very, very down. I waited until 8:30 until they were going to broadcast the names of the hospitals associated with the victims. It never came. I ran home with my wife. We went on the internet. My son's name was still on. There was a different time, a different case number. I wrote to the person who was in charge of that list, and he sent it back to me, a message saying he was sorry. There were errors on the list. He doesn't know where my son is, and I asked him to validate the list where he got I still don't know where he got my son's name from.
What a tragedy.
Yeah, I mean, it's
so your
bad
hopes
enough.
were
Yeah.
high as possible.
Right, we were elated and hysterical with, in a positive, just feeling terrific. And then it was almost worse because then we went really down to ground zero in terms of our own emotions, because we just could not believe that he would survive. We even said, gee, this is going to be the story of the century, how he did get down. And we were so thrilled. We were just doing whatever we could to find him, and obviously it was just worse for us.
Thank you, Lenny and Leona. We wish you every good wish, and remind our viewers that anyone looking for people missing in these attacks can email photos to missing@cnn.com. missing@cnn.com. The night vigil continues. This is at Union Square area. That's around 14th Street in Manhattan. Joining us now here in Los Angeles is another devastated gentleman. He is Michael Schakowsky. He is president and CEO of Kroll Incorporated, the risk consulting company. 7 years ago, that company was hired by the Port Authority to assess the risk and security at the World Trade Center and at area airports. Michael's a former prosecutor. He prosecuted John Gotti. And he lost in that accident the former FBI agent John O'Neill, who you recently hired, right?
We recently placed him at the Port Authority.
To,
in fact, head their security. And it is absolutely devastating to have us consult with them, the Port Authority, and to try to put in great security in a client who is conscious about its obligations to put in security and to protect its people and to protect its clients, and to have this devastating attack occur and to fail to be able to do anything about it.
in all your security planning, and that's your business, right?
That's our business.
Did you ever think of anything like this?
Well, you think about things, but you don't think about the staccato attacks that in fact occurred here. 1, 2, 3, you try to take the punch. You have concentric circles of security that you try to plan for. You try to do assessments. You try to do that kind of concentric circles. But to be able to be prepared for this, Mr. O'Neill, who was one of the world's experts in terrorism,
He was on this show once.
had worked understood these kind of terrorist activities. We could locally plan. We think O'Neill would have been proud of our planning.
Where was he?
He was actually in the first tower that was struck, fairly high up, and we were planning to have a meeting with that group at 9:30 that day with some of our people.
Was anything learned from that first attack years ago?
Well, what was learned were obviously lessons forgotten, Larry, unfortunately.
Like?
Lessons of vigilance. Unfortunately, maybe we only lost 6 people that day. But we learned about this group. We learned what they were willing to do. We learned about the cell nature of it. But we forgot those lessons. We didn't have good intelligence. We had good local planning at the Port Authority, but it didn't do any good.
All right. Was it also a failure of your company?
Well, we don't think it was a failure of our company or of the port. We don't think that there have been conversations about how do you get people out of there quicker. Could we have gotten people out of the South Tower quicker? There's been some discussions about people were told to stay still.
Yeah, or go back in.
Or go back in. But there was an assessment phase. No one knew that second jet was going to strike. And in fact, in the assessment phase, the danger of falling debris from that first tower very well could have been the greatest danger, so that you couldn't presume that a second jet was going to hit. You just couldn't presume it.
Do you know how those people who were told back up got those reports?
Well, we've heard it was on PAs. One of the things was, unfortunately, the brain center of the Port Authority security was in fact taken out in that first strike. We believe that in fact there was good assessment was going on about what in fact do you do in those 25 minutes or so.
Is complacency, as time goes on, human?
It is absolutely human, but it's not professional. And the complacency that we all had as security experts, our intelligence, our law enforcement, our military has, is not acceptable. We knew we had this enemy, and we had to take more than local preventive actions. Unfortunately, we didn't learn the lessons of '93.
How are you reacting personally to this?
I am absolutely devastated. Every day this week I've in fact cried, because I see the stories that you have said here, and in fact it is our job to have the right stuff and prevent this stuff. I spent most of my life trying to do that, and to have in fact have this kind of failure, I'm personally devastated.
Have you talked to officials at the World Trade Center?
We have people down there. We're talking to the officials down there. We're talking to the Port Authority. They're devastated. They think, and we think, that they've done everything they could have done. I don't blame the structural engineers. I don't blame the assessment people. What happened here, we believe, was more than a local failure. There was no local failure.
Port Authority covers a lot of areas.
It does.
Are you worried about other ones?
Absolutely. We're worried. Anyone who knows the bin Laden group or these groups understand this is not the end of this. We can't be terrorized this. We're in this war, but this is not the end. This is in fact a group that is bent on killing Americans. It did it in Africa. It did it in Europe. It's going to do it again.
Your expertise is security.
Yes.
And that's supposed to be the American expertise. So how did this fail? How did the American intelligence fail, in your opinion?
I think we were fighting a war that was past. We were fighting the last war. We weren't fighting this new war. We were fighting the Cold War. We had our devices, our services were in fact geared to that. This intelligence services. We weren't doing the kind of things where we had to get in our hands dirty. As
Secretary Rumsfeld said, the unknown unknown.
The unknown unknown. And we didn't understand the disease. We should have understood the disease in '93. We should understand it. It's hard to recognize a disease if you haven't seen it. But we should have seen it in '93. Unfortunately, we didn't recognize the disease. Now we have, but we lost thousands of people.
No one could have said, though, that one day 3 or 4 planes will be taken and flown into these buildings.
It wouldn't have been a good novel. It would have been too extreme.
Right. Would have been turned down.
Would have been turned down.
Good luck, Michael. When are you going back to New York?
As soon as I can get there.
Michael Schakowsky, the president and CEO of Kroll Incorporated. I spoke a little while ago with New York Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton a very short time ago, and our first question was she concerned about the evacuation of the Capitol today?
Well, Larry, I had already voted so that I had left the Capitol. I was on my way back to the Russell Building so that I could talk with you tonight, and I was very concerned, but I quickly learned that there wasn't any real basis for concern, but we're taking every precaution we can, and that was one of the necessary ones.
The president's going to your state tomorrow. Are you going to?
Yes, I am. I went to the White House earlier this afternoon. We had an excellent discussion. I met first in the Oval Office with the president, my colleague, Senator Schumer, the 2 senators from Virginia. We pledged our support. We received a briefing from the president, and I was delighted to also learn that the president would support the request that Senator Schumer and I have made so that New York gets the resources that we need to deal with this extraordinary tragedy. Then we had a larger meeting in the cabinet room with representatives and senators from a number of states. The president was resolute, determined. I felt very positive about the meeting.
Will you be traveling with him?
Yes, I will. I'll be going with the president back to New York, where I was yesterday with the governor and the mayor, after we have the national prayer service at the National Cathedral.
You know, you were in those seats. Sandy Berger told Associated Press today that your administration, the Clinton administration, waged a military strike against bin Laden in the final days of that presidency. What can you gather this must be like?
Well, I told the president today, and I have publicly stated this, Larry, that I do have some understanding of the extraordinary burdens that any president bears, and a time like this just magnifies them immeasurably. This is a different kind of war, and make no mistake about it, we are at war. But we're at war against an enemy that doesn't have a capital, doesn't have a state. When Pearl Harbor was bombed, we knew where to look, and we knew what we needed to do to win. So this is a more difficult time, but I'm absolutely confident we are up to meeting this challenge. During the years that my husband was in the White House, you'll recall that we did launch an attack on some of Osama bin Laden's assets in Afghanistan, and we were successful in a limited way with respect to some of the personnel and equipment, but we were not successful in eradicating him and his network from the